Hey, what's up everyone? My name's William, and today we're going to be going over the different EQs in Logic. So first of all, I've opened up a new session here, and I've just loaded up 4 tracks, all with the same sample on it, and we have a couple of different EQs that we're going to go over. So first of all, the sample I'm using, I went into Apple Loops and I searched for pianos, and I'm using the 70s Rock Piano 01. And also for this sample right here, we'll use in a little bit, I'm using the 70s Rock Piano 44. So that's just something to keep in mind. Starting off though, we're going to first go over the channel EQ on this first track here. So opening it up, you can go to your plugins and then your EQs and channel EQ, or for the channel EQ, you can actually just click on this EQ box and it'll automatically bring up a channel EQ onto your track. So starting with the channel EQ, we can see quite a few different things here. I'm not going to go too in depth with any of these EQs because I feel like we should be fairly familiar with EQs at this point in the book. This is just showing the different types that are in Logic. So we have an 8-band EQ here. We have 8 different bands that we can each adjust the amplitude, the hertz where it's located, and the Q, how wide of a curve it is. So if we look at like this frequency range, we can see Q, it might be something that's a little confusing at first, but it just depends how narrow or how wide it's cutting or boosting the signal. So that's just something to keep in mind. Q goes from 0.1 to all the way up to 100 if you're going to get crazy narrow with it. But that's just something to keep in mind. It's a very important tool when it comes to EQing. So yeah, we have the different bands here. And honestly, this is about all there is to this channel EQ. We can have an analyzer here, which if we're playing our audio, I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. We can see the waveform as we're playing it. And also you have to be careful as to what this is, because this is either post-processing, meaning after you EQ. So let me just do a big cut right in the middle just so we can see the difference. So between post analyzer and pre-analyzer, post is it's analyzing the audio signal after the cuts and boosts have been applied to it, and pre-analyzer is it's showing us the wave before it goes through the EQ. We're not going to hear any difference, but you see the waveform, it looks normal here, and in post you can tell it's obviously being cut by the waveform. So that's just something to keep in mind. A nice tip. Analyzer is very useful to use when you're EQing. Other than the different bands and the different, the decibel and the hertz and the Q that we can adjust. On the highest band and the lowest band, the high pass and low pass, instead of a boost or cut level, we have just a slope level, which determines how steep of a slope we have for this low pass, or for this high pass, excuse me, or for this low pass. So that's just something to keep in mind. Instead of a boost or gain, we have just a slope for those two bands. Next, we have a processing dialog box here, which it determines which frequencies we're going to be affecting. This is stereo, meaning it's the whole stereo image. Left is only the left channel, only the right channel, only the mid channel, and only the side channel. So those are different things to keep in mind. Also, we have a gain right here. But other than that about sums up the channel EQ. It's a very powerful 8-band EQ. It's probably the EQ you'll be using most when working in Logic. But moving on to our linear EQ, I'm going to open this up. And if you notice, it looks exactly the same. It looks exactly the same as the other EQ. The only difference is it is a black color instead of a blue. So this EQ is it literally is just the same as the channel EQ. The only difference is this EQ has a different underlying technology that will help preserve the phase of the audio file that you're EQing. So no matter how big of a cut or boost you're doing, it's going to preserve the phase of that audio file. So that's something to keep in mind. Linear EQs do use more CPU though, so it's usually recommended to only use those on like mastering channels and things like that. But that's about it with the linear EQ. It just has a different technology that makes it work different on the back end. Moving on to the match EQ. This is one of the more interesting EQs because the match EQ is what's called a fingerprint EQ, meaning it takes one signal and it uses that signal to create an EQ, and it applies it to another signal. So, for example, we're going to use this 70s rock piano number 44 as our EQ. So what we're going to do is we're going to click, and by the way, I mean, all these other parameters are exactly the same. We have an analyzer, we have which field we want to be affecting, things like that. We have how much we want the EQ to work, we have smoothing, it smooths out the EQ, and then we have the type of phase we want. So, I mean, a lot of similar parameters here. But moving on, I'm going to click this Learn button for the template. So it's going to learn our EQ template. So I'm going to play it, and it's going to play the 70s rock piano 44, and we're going to use that as the template for our EQ. So that's what that sounds like. So now it's saved this average level of that piano file, as you can see. Now we're going to click Current, the Learn button for the current audio that we're going to be using. And then we're going to just play that. So now it has the average level for the current audio file saved in the EQ. And now when we click this equals button, it generates an EQ that will make this piano, this piano number 1, rock piano 01, it'll make it sound more like this 70s rock piano number 44. So we're going to listen to the rock piano 44 real quick, just to see what that sounds like without the EQ. And now let's take a listen to our original piano sound, and we're going to listen to it with the EQ on. You're going to hear that it sounds has a lot similar tones, or a lot more similar tones to the second piano now. It has a darker sound. Now if I turn this off, we can hear it's much brighter. But definitely mess with this EQ a bit here, because it takes some getting used to understand what's happening. But it essentially makes our original sound, the one we used with the current learn, it's going to make that one sound more like our template. So that's just something very cool. If you want something to sound, if you want it to have more continuity throughout your song, like if an example right here, if you have a piano part that sounds a little bit darker, and you have another piano part that sounds a little bit brighter, and nothing's changed other than the recording, then you can use a match EQ to just make the sound more related. They sound much more similar to each other now. So that about sums up the match EQ. It's really cool. It's definitely a unique EQ in Logic. Definitely dive more into that on your own time. But the last EQ we're going to go over is a single EQ, which this is just a single band EQ. It's very simple. We have, an EQ mode, which type of cut we want this this single band to be, and then we can just set the frequency, we set the slope, and then we set the Q. All very simple stuff. Or again, if it's not a low cut or a high cut, we can just set the gain, how much we're boosting or cutting here. So that's really simple. All this is if we go back to our channel EQ and look at that, this single band EQ is literally if we took, just one band. See here we have which frequencies over here, the decibels we want to do. And since I'm on low cut, it's our slope right now. So let me just switch it to low shelf. So now we have our decibels right here. And then we have our Q factor. And then we have our Q factor over here. So it's fairly simple. If you know how to use a channel EQ, you'll know how to use a single EQ. But that about sums it up for the different types of EQs. Definitely practice with these. The channel EQ is what you'll most likely be using the most when you're working with Logic. But just practice with the different EQs. Get used to training your ear to listen to how EQs affect different sounds and things like that, and how certain frequencies, when you cut them, affect certain sounds differently. It's a lot of ear training to get used to EQing in general, but it really pays off in the end. So that's about it, though. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a lot. Again, my name is William. Thank you for watching.